right, everyone, we are back. This time for another round of focaccia making. I wanted to take a moment and record a new video, a new introduction to this entire thing, because I'm also going to include the previous video from when I taught focaccia pizza. It's all the same technique, it's all the same discipline, all of those same skills that you're learning while building that dough during the 3-day process. However, this time around, we're focusing more so on turning it into bread, focaccia, and not necessarily using it as pizza. So rather than making an entirely new long form video, because that one is pretty good and I really like it, I don't want to redo it. Instead, just ignore the fact that I keep saying pizza in it and instead understand that it is for this focaccia. However, I did want to cover a few things because now, while that video is from last time, I have learned some new things along the way. As that happens, we're all continuously learning. So I wanted to make this video to cover that and show you some of those new things that I learned during that long 3-day process. So what I recommend is go start that video first. While your dough is proofing in your downtime, come back, finish this video from right here, and then continue on along and decide how you want to finish your bread making journey. Because what I'm going to cover here is going to be something that streamlines that proofing and shaping process right towards the end of your long fermentation. So let's get started, shall we? I have a batch of dough here. This has been proofing for about 4 or 5 hours. I've been doing my stretch and folds. I've been doing my coil folds. You can see it has doubled in size. Note that this is an 8-loaf batch, so it's a little bigger than the 6-loaf batch that I did in the other video, but nonetheless, it has doubled in size. It has filled out the container. It is at that 4.5, 5-hour proof mark where I've just continued on those folds. Now, normally at this point, when I think I'm done, I would put the lid on here, stick this in the fridge, and start the process on tomorrow. And that's how the other video ends. But what I have learned is a way to kind of streamline that. So that way you don't have to do a lot of work tomorrow, but instead you can pre-shape and shape your loaves in their pans that they're going to rest in and bake in as another option. Now, is it as good as the other method that takes a little more work and a little more effort? Probably not. However, it is good if you know you have other things going on tomorrow. You don't want to have to devote time to getting your bread ready, doing a proofing and shaping process in the morning prior to getting your focaccia into their pans. So check out what I mean. We have our dough here, and we have everything we need for our pans. I'm going to be using a scale for measuring. I'm going to have a small tray that sits on top of the scale. That's just because I know my dough is not going to fit on this small scale, and I want to make sure that I am weighing each individual loaf. I have my aluminum pans here. These are nice because they come with lids that are going to help during the proofing process, but you can use cast iron, you can use a sheet tray, you can use a baking dish, whatever it is that you have is going to be okay. Just use the formula sheet to figure out how much focaccia is going to go in each pan depending on the size, adjusting those numbers on the sheet. So now what we want to do is get our focaccia out of the pan onto the countertop so we can cut off pieces to portion, shape, and get into their baking vessels. This can be done the night before, as I'm doing now, or the morning of. I find that the morning of usually leads to a better, taller rise and fluffier, more open crumb structure. Doing it the night before is definitely easier, but a little different in variation in the way that the inner crumb and those little bubbles when you do a cross section are going to form. So now what we want to do here is just very gently dump our bread. And now at this point, even if you're unsure, you can only portion some of this, give this a little fold, put it back into your container, and let this rest till tomorrow and do a little side-by-side comparison and see the difference in the loaves. Totally an option as well. So now I'm going to be using a bench scraper to cut and portion all of my dough, keeping in mind what was the top and what is the bottom while it was in its container proofing. That's important to help it give a nice open and even rise. You want to keep the bottom as the bottom and the top as the top. So be sure to remember. I'm going to cut away pieces, trying to guesstimate as close as I can. You want to make the smallest amount of cuts as possible, trying not to add a bunch of little pieces to your dough to get it to the right size. So we have one loaf there. And we have one loaf here. And like I said, the rest of this, I can give a gentle fold, make that the bottom again, stick that back into my container, set this in the fridge and let it continue proofing till tomorrow. And I'm just gonna do 2 into their pans right now as the demonstration. So next what we wanna do is called pre-shaping. So we wanna pre-shape these into rounds for a round pan or rectangles for a rectangular pan. So your dough has quite the elasticity at this point. Don't be afraid to stretch it out. Give yourself a nice little starting point. And then we're just going to grab the corners, bringing them into the center, crossing, overlapping, making a nice tight little package, flipping the dough over. Now you have the top, that was the top. And I'm just going to use my fingertips to tuck the bottoms in and tighten up our little dough ball. Now, let's see that again. I have my dough here. We'll just stretch out on the countertop. We'll go corners in. Flip it over. Give it a little round to tuck out the bottom. And now we'll let these rest on the counter for about 5 minutes just to relax, let that dough adhere to itself while we prepare our baking pans. While our dough is resting here and relaxing in its pre-shaped stage, we'll grab our baking vessel, whatever that may be. And then we have some options, something else I've discovered over this past year. Now, normally what I've always done is to use a combination of pan spray and olive oil. Now, what we all know is that olive oil starts to degrade and sometimes gets a little bitter at very high temperatures. The solution for that? Vegetable shortening. That's right, the stuff in the tub. This can withstand very high temperatures. It's neutral in flavor, and it's going to give you that beautiful crispy crust on the outside of the bread while leaving the inside soft and tender without imparting any negative bitter flavors that olive oil may sometimes do. Now, I use vegetable shortening whenever I'm using my heavy duty cast iron pans because those take a very long time to heat up. The olive oil ends up getting very hot, and it's not always the best case for the bread. Now, in this case, if you're using the aluminum pans, these heat up very quick. There's a chance you're not gonna burn your oil. However, it's always worth maybe doing a little side-by-side comparison. So let's do that. So pans here, we'll start one with lots of our spray. Don't be shy. And a generous amount of olive oil. I always like to just fill up the bottom of the pan, whatever size pan that may be. And then our other one here, we'll do our vegetable shortening. And I'm just going to apply a nice layer all the way down to the corners, up onto the rim and the sides of the pan, because that's where our crust is going to form. Now, another benefit to using the vegetable shortening here is while the dough is resting and proofing in these pans, whether it be overnight or for a number of hours, there's less of a chance that the dough is going to absorb that additional oil. Now here, the dough is definitely going to start to incorporate the oil, not necessarily a bad thing, but just something to consider when you're talking about flavor and texture. So now our bread has been resting for about 5 or 10 minutes. I'm going to come with my scraper, pick that up, and very gently just place it into the center of my pans. And then at this point, we can just grab our lids. Now, it is important to make sure these always stay covered during the proofing process so that the bread doesn't form a skin. Now these I'm going to stick into the fridge overnight until tomorrow. I can pull them out about 4 or 5 hours, depending on the temperature of your kitchen, before I'm ready to bake them. And that's it. All of the work is done today. Really streamlining that process. So this is a new technique that I've developed that works pretty well. However, in the live stream, I'll demonstrate how to go and do this all over again tomorrow morning, the day of your bake. That's what I'm gonna do with the rest of that dough. So at the end of the day, pizza, focaccia, it's all the same thing. We're all bread. Thank you for watching. And of course, give me all those questions. That's what I'm here for.